right," he said softly, almost bored. "You gonna scream, or you gonna behave?" The laugh that followed wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It came from somewhere behind him, somewhere in the crowd, and it carried the weight of people who already knew how this usually ended. Her back pressed harder into the cold concrete pillar, as if the building itself might step in where no one else had. The cafeteria smelled like reheated pizza and bleach, fluorescent lights humming overhead, trays clattering, conversations blurring into noise that suddenly felt very far away. "Stop," she said. The word came out thin, not because she lacked strength, but because shock had stolen the air from her lungs. Her hands hovered uselessly at her sides, fingers curling and uncurling, brain scrambling to catch up with what was happening in front of dozens of people who pretended not to see. He leaned in closer, varsity jacket bright against the dull institutional walls, his grin easy and practiced. He wasn't rushed. He never was. That was the worst part. The way he treated this like entertainment, like he had time. "Relax," he murmured. "It's just a joke." Before this story goes any further, take a second to subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. Her heart hammered so loud she wondered if anyone else could hear it. She scanned the room instinctively, searching for a face that might change, for eyes that might lock onto hers and decide to act. Most looked away. Some stared openly. A few smirked, feeding off the energy of the moment without ever stepping into it. And somewhere, at the edge of all that noise, a chair scraped against the floor. No one noticed yet. Not him, not her. But something had shifted, and once it did, there was no going back. Chapter 1. The first thing she noticed about the cafeteria wasn't the people. It was the sound. A constant, droning echo of voices bouncing off tile and glass, layered with the mechanical hum of lights that never fully shut off. It was the kind of place where privacy went to die, where everything felt exposed even when nothing was happening. On her first day, she told herself, that was fine. Exposure meant visibility. Visibility meant opportunity. She stood near the pillar because it gave her something solid at her back. Old habit. Years of training had taught her to be aware of space, exits, blind spots. Even now, in workout gear and camouflage pants, her posture was alert without being aggressive, shoulders squared, feet planted. Anyone looking closely would have seen it, the way she carried herself, the quiet discipline in her movements. But most people didn't look closely. They saw what they expected to see. The new girl. She'd transferred mid-semester, which always came with whispers. No one asked why directly. They never did. They filled in the gaps themselves. Some assumed trouble, others assumed weakness. Almost all assumed she wouldn't last. She grabbed her tray, nodded politely at the cafeteria worker, and scanned for an open seat. Tables were packed in clusters, social lines already drawn and enforced without words. Athletes here, honors kids there. A group laughing too loud in the corner. She spotted an empty chair near the center aisle and moved toward it, keeping her gaze forward, breathing steady. That was when she felt it. Not the touch, yet, but the shift. The way the air changes when someone steps into your space without permission. "Hey," a voice said. She turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge him without fully facing him. He was taller, broad-shouldered, the kind of confidence that came from knowing people would back him up. The varsity jacket wasn't subtle. It didn't need to be. It was a signal, a uniform. "Yes?" she said, calm, neutral. He smiled like he'd already won something. "You're new, I know." A few chuckles rippled from behind him. His friends, always nearby, always just far enough away to pretend they weren't involved. "You don't talk much," he said. "I'm here to eat." That should have been the end of it. In a normal place it would have been, but normal didn't apply here, not when power was currency and boredom made people cruel. He stepped closer. Too close. She shifted her weight instinctively, angling her body, keeping her tray level. Her eyes flicked to the exits again, not in fear, but assessment. She told herself not to overreact. She'd dealt with worse than smug teenagers in a cafeteria. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated. Giving it felt like handing over leverage. "Yeah, and I don't give it out to strangers." That was when his grin tightened, just slightly. The moment the joke stopped being a joke. "You think you're better than us?" he asked, loud enough now that nearby conversations dipped. "No," she said. "I think I'm busy." She tried to step past him. That was the mistake, not because she was wrong, but because he wasn't used to being bypassed. His arm shot out, blocking her path, his hand brushing against her tray. Milk sloshed dangerously close to the edge. "Watch it," he said, though he was the one who'd moved. Her pulse spiked. Around them the crowd sensed it too, that invisible tightening, like everyone leaning in without moving. "Move," she said quietly. He laughed. "You got an attitude, and you're in my way." For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or irritation that she wasn't playing the role he'd assigned her. He leaned in again, voice dropping. "Careful," he said. "People don't like girls who don't know their place." That word, place, landed heavier than the rest. Her jaw clenched. Memories she hadn't invited stirred at the edges of her mind. Training grounds, locker rooms, moments where silence had been the safer option. She swallowed it down. "I know exactly where I am," she said, "and you're done." She tried again to move. This time his hand didn't stop at blocking her path. Chapter 2. The contact was brief, almost casual. That was what made it worse. The way he treated it like nothing, like her body was just another object in the space he controlled. Her back hit the pillar harder than she expected, the concrete cold even through fabric. The tray clattered to the floor, plastic echoing loudly, drawing every eye in the room at once. Time did that strange stretching thing. Sounds sharpened, faces blurred. "Whoa," someone said, half laughing. "Relax," he said again, hands up in mock innocence. She tripped. She didn't respond right away. Her mind raced through options, consequences. Fight back and become the problem. Stay still and let it continue. Her breathing went shallow, not from fear, but from anger she was fighting to keep contained. Her hands curled into fists at her sides, nails biting into her palms. "Back up," she said. He didn't. Instead, he leaned in, close enough that she could smell cologne and cafeteria grease. His voice dropped, meant only for her, though everyone knew what was happening. "You embarrassed me," he said. "That's not smart." Her eyes darted again, searching the crowd. A girl at a nearby table looked down at her phone. A guy shifted uncomfortably but stayed seated. No one stepped forward. The silence was loud, suffocating. She felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with skin. It was the public nature of it, the understanding that whatever happened next would define her here. New girl, trouble, victim, fighter. Labels waiting to snap into place. "Let me go," she said, firmer now. He smirked. "Or what?" That was the question, wasn't it? Or what? Because he knew the rules as well as she did. He knew how quickly blame traveled, how easily stories bent. He had witnesses, he had history, she had none of that here. A flicker of movement caught her eye. The scraping chair again, louder this time. Somewhere behind the crowd a man stood, older, broader, not dressed like the rest. He didn't rush, he didn't shout. He just watched, eyes sharp, posture relaxed in a way that suggested control rather than passivity. She didn't know who he was. Not yet. But something in his stillness steadied her. Just enough. The bully noticed it too, glancing over his shoulder, annoyed. "What?" he snapped, then turned back to her, irritation creeping into his voice. "You think someone's coming to save you?" She met his gaze, chest rising and falling. "I think you should stop." The room held its breath. He laughed again, but it sounded thinner this time. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You don't get to tell me what to do." In that moment, the power imbalance was absolute. Him standing, crowd-backed, untouchable, her pinned, isolated, every move scrutinized, and yet beneath the shock, beneath the humiliation, something else burned. Resolve. The quiet kind that didn't announce itself, that waited. The man in the background took a step forward. No one noticed yet, but the moment had already crossed a line, and lines, once crossed, demand answers. The chair scraped again, unmistakable this time. Not loud enough to command the room, but sharp enough to cut through the tension like a blade against stone. The sound didn't belong to the usual cafeteria chaos. It had intention behind it, the kind that comes from someone who has already decided something. The bully glanced back, irritation flashing across his face, then returned his attention to her, as if daring the interruption to matter. His hand still hovered too close, not touching now, but close enough to remind her that he could. That reminder sat heavy in her chest. "Look at you," he said, voice low, smug. "Acting tough. You think people are scared of you?" She didn't answer. She focused on her breathing, slow and controlled, the way she'd been taught long before this place, long before fluorescent lights and plastic trays. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Panic wasted energy. Panic made mistakes. Behind him, the man took another step forward. He didn't fit the environment. That was the first thing anyone would notice if they were paying attention. No backpack, no school colors, plain dark shirt, worn boots. His posture was loose but not careless, every movement economical, as if he'd learned long ago that unnecessary motion was a liability. He scanned the room quickly, noting exits, distances, reactions. Old habits never really died. He'd come in for a late lunch, nothing more. Grab a sandwich, sit quietly, kill time before an appointment across town. He'd chosen a table near the wall out of instinct, back to something solid. He noticed things, always had. At first he'd registered the commotion as background noise. Teenagers posturing, voices raised. It happened everywhere. But then he'd seen her face. Not fear exactly. Shock, yes. Anger held tightly in check. And something else beneath it. Discipline. The kind that didn't belong in this setting. The kind you didn't learn from gym class or social media clips. The kind forged somewhere harsher. He'd watched long enough to know this wasn't mutual. Power flowed one way here, and it wasn't subtle. The bully shifted closer to her again, invading space like it was a game. "Say something," he pressed. "Or you gonna cry?" That did it. "Hey," the man said. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive. But it carried. The room didn't go silent, not completely, but the sound dipped, like a wave pulling back. The bully turned fully this time, annoyance clear. "Mind your business." The man stepped into clearer view now, stopping a few feet away. He didn't square up. He didn't puff his chest. He just stood there, eyes steady, voice even. "I am," he said. "Now." A few students shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't part of the script they were used to. Adults usually came in loud or not at all. This man did neither. The bully laughed, though it came out forced. "She's fine. You some kind of hero?" The man glanced at her just once, not in a way that asked permission, in a way that checked. She met his eyes, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She wasn't asking to be saved. She was acknowledging presence. "That's not what this is," the man said, turning back. "Step away from her." The bully scoffed. "Or what?" The question echoed again, heavier now. "Or what?" It was the same challenge he'd thrown at her, thrown at teachers, thrown at anyone who'd ever tested him and backed down. He expected the same outcome here. The man exhaled slowly. "Or you're going to learn something today you won't enjoy." There it was. Not a threat. A statement. The bully's smile faltered just for a fraction of a second. He recovered quickly, puffing up, crowd behind him lending false courage. "You touch me, You won't," the man interrupted calmly. "Because if you were going to do something, you'd have done it already." That landed, harder than shouting ever could. The room felt different now. Not safer yet, but altered. Like gravity had shifted just enough to be noticeable. She slid a step sideways, no longer pinned. No one stopped her, and for the first time since it began, the bully hesitated. Chapter 4. Hesitation was not something the bully was familiar with. It felt wrong, like wearing shoes on the wrong feet. His confidence had always been automatic, fed by laughter, by silence, by the unspoken agreement that he could do what he wanted and walk away clean. That agreement was fraying now, right in front of him. "You think you scare me?" he snapped, though his voice had risen, betrayed him. "This isn't your school." The man nodded once. "I know." That answer confused him. It wasn't defensive, it wasn't reactive, it was factual. And it made him uneasy in a way he didn't know how to name. Around them, the crowd had shifted from passive entertainment to something closer to uncertainty. Phones were still out, but hands trembled. People whispered. This was new territory, an adult who wasn't playing by the usual rules. A situation that didn't resolve neatly. She stood a few feet away now, rubbing her wrist where adrenaline still buzzed under the skin. Her heart hadn't slowed, but her mind had sharpened. She watched the man carefully, recognizing patterns. The way he positioned himself between her and the bully without making a show of it. The way his weight stayed balanced, ready. She'd seen that before, not here, somewhere else. The bully took a step forward, then stopped when the man didn't move back. Their proximity was close enough now that the difference between them became obvious. Not size, presence. One was loud, the other didn't need to be. "You don't know who I am," the bully said, trying again to reclaim ground. "I know exactly who you are," the man replied. "You're someone who thinks witnesses are protection." A murmur rippled through the room. That hit a nerve, because it named the truth everyone understood but never said. The bully thrived on crowds, on shared guilt, on diffusion of responsibility. "Touch her again," the man continued, voice still level, "and every set of eyes in here becomes a problem for you, not a shield." The bully glanced around. Faces looked back at him now, not all amused, some curious, some uneasy, some already distancing themselves, inching chairs back, signaling they didn't want to be part of this anymore. "You can't do anything," he said, but it sounded hollow. "You don't even belong here." The man smiled slightly, not with humor but recognition. "I belong anywhere someone decides to hurt another person in public." That was the moment the weight of the situation settled in. Not just for the bully, but for everyone watching. This wasn't about rules or authority or who had the loudest voice. It was about accountability, immediate and unavoidable. She felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief exactly, validation, the quiet confirmation that what she'd felt was real, that this wasn't her overreacting or misunderstanding. Someone else saw it too. A cafeteria monitor appeared at the edge of the room, drawn by the tension. "What's going on?" she asked, uncertain, already overwhelmed. The bully opened his mouth, ready to spin it. The man spoke first. He blocked her, pushed her, and refused to let her leave, he said. Clear, precise, no embellishment. The monitor blinked. "You don't belong here." The man smiled slightly, not with humor but recognition. "I belong anywhere someone decides to hurt another person in public." That was the moment the weight of the situation settled in, not just for the bully but for everyone watching. This wasn't about rules or authority or who had the loudest voice. It was about accountability, immediate and unavoidable. She felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief exactly, validation, the quiet confirmation that what she'd felt was real, that this wasn't her overreacting or misunderstanding. Someone else saw it too. A cafeteria monitor appeared at the edge of the room, drawn by the tension. "What's going on?" she asked, uncertain, already overwhelmed. The bully opened his mouth, ready to spin it. The man spoke first. He blocked her, pushed her, and refused to let her leave, he said. Clear, precise, no embellishment. The monitor blinked, looked at the spilled tray, the pillar, the space between bodies, evidence she hadn't wanted to see but couldn't ignore. "Is that true?" she asked the bully. He hesitated again, just a beat too long. The answer didn't matter anymore. She stepped forward, voice firmer now. "I want to file a report." The bully spun toward her, eyes wide. "You can't." "I can," she said, steady, "and I am." The man took a step back, giving space now that it was no longer needed. His role was done for the moment. Intervention wasn't about dominance. It was about restoring balance. As staff began moving, as murmurs grew louder, she met the man's eyes again. Gratitude flickered there, unspoken but clear. He nodded once, subtle. Then he turned away, already fading back into the background. But nothing in that room would return to how it was before, because power had been challenged. And once that happens, consequences follow. The hallway outside the cafeteria felt colder than it should have. The same fluorescent lights followed her, but here they hummed louder, harsher, like they were no longer pretending to be neutral. She walked beside the cafeteria monitor, her steps steady even though her legs still carried the echo of adrenaline. Behind them, the bully trailed with two administrators now, his shoulders tense, his jaw clenched. The crowd they left behind buzzed like a disturbed hive, speculation already spreading faster than truth ever did. She kept her eyes forward. That was the first lesson she'd learned years ago, long before this building, long before this town. When pressure comes, you don't look back for approval. You don't scan faces for comfort. You keep moving, one step at a time, because momentum is protection. Inside the small administrative office, the air was stale, heavy with the smell of paper and old coffee. A desk lamp cast a yellow pool of light that felt too intimate for what was about to be discussed. The monitor gestured for her to sit. She did, hands folded loosely in her lap, posture upright. Calm wasn't weakness. Calm was control. "Tell us what happened," one of the administrators said, already opening a folder. She spoke clearly. No drama. No exaggeration. She described the blocked path, the unwanted contact, the refusal to let her leave. She named the feeling without letting it swallow her. That took effort. It always did. But she understood something many people didn't. Emotional clarity carried more weight than emotional volume. As she spoke, the bully shifted in his chair, scoffing softly, shaking his head as if bored. It was a performance, one that had worked before. "That's not how it went," he cut in. She was rude. I was joking. Everyone saw it. The administrator raised a hand. "You'll have your turn." He leaned back, arms crossed, trying to reclaim space. But the room wasn't a cafeteria. There was no crowd to hide in here, no laughter to cushion him. And when I asked him to move, she continued, "He escalated. He used his body to stop me." Silence settled. The administrator looked at the spilled tray photo already pulled up on a tablet, snapped by someone and forwarded. Evidence had a way of stripping stories down to their bones. "We have multiple witnesses," the administrator said carefully. "Some corroborate your account." The bully's head snapped up. "Who? That's not relevant right now." Something shifted behind his eyes. Not fear yet. Calculation. He was realizing this wasn't ending the way it usually did. Outside the office, through the narrow window in the door, she saw the man again. The one who had stepped in. He stood with his arms relaxed at his sides, speaking quietly to another staff member. He didn't look anxious. He didn't look triumphant. He looked resolved, like someone who had done this kind of thing before and knew exactly when to step forward and when to step back. The administrator followed her gaze briefly, then returned to his notes. "We're taking this seriously," he said. You did the right thing by reporting. Those words landed heavier than she expected, not because she needed reassurance, but because so few people ever said them out loud. The bully snorted. This is ridiculous. The administrator looked at him sharply. What's ridiculous is your behavior. The sentence hung there, undeniable. She felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Not victory, something quieter. Validation mixed with exhaustion. Standing up cost energy. Always had, but it was still worth it. As the meeting wrapped up, the administrator outlined next steps. Formal investigation, temporary suspension from extracurriculars, mandatory review of conduct, consequences that would ripple beyond this room. The bully's bravado cracked, just slightly. This is going to ruin my record. The administrator didn't soften. That's something you should have considered earlier. She stood when dismissed, smoothing her shirt, grounding herself in the physical motion. As she reached the door, the man caught her eye again. This time he gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. Not pride, recognition. Outside, the hallway felt different. Same lights, same walls. But she walked taller now, not because she'd won, but because she hadn't folded. And sometimes, in places like this, that mattered more. Chapter 6. News traveled fast. By the end of the day, versions of the story had already mutated, stretched, bent to fit whoever was telling it. Some said she'd overreacted. Others said the bully had finally pushed too far. A few exaggerated the intervention, turning the man into something larger than life, because people liked their heroes clean and dramatic. She ignored it all. That night, alone in her small apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall long after the sun had gone down. The silence pressed in, heavier than the cafeteria ever had. This was the part no one filmed, the aftermath, the questions that crept in when adrenaline faded. Had she handled it right? Would things get worse before they got better? Would this define her here, whether she wanted it to or not? She closed her eyes and breathed. Across town, the man sat at his own kitchen table, a half-eaten meal cooling in front of him. He replayed the scene in his head, not because he doubted his actions, but because reflection was habit. Years of service had wired him that way. After-action reviews, they called it. What went right? What went wrong? What could be better next time? He knew he'd crossed an invisible line today. Not legally, not morally, but socially. Intervening in public situations always carried risk. Escalation, misinterpretation, retaliation. He'd weighed it all in seconds and stepped in anyway, because some moments didn't wait for perfect conditions. The next morning, the cafeteria felt like a different battlefield. People glanced at her openly now. Some nodded, some avoided eye contact. A few offered quiet words of support, awkward but sincere. One girl muttered, "That was brave," as she passed. Brave. She wasn't sure about that. She'd been angry. She'd been cornered. She'd acted. The bully wasn't there. His absence was loud. Chairs sat empty where he usually held court. The space felt lighter, not safe yet, but less oppressive. She spotted the man near the back again, eating quietly, alone. He caught her eye and gestured subtly toward an empty chair across from him, an invitation without pressure. She hesitated only a moment before joining him. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded. "You handled yourself. That could have gone bad." "It could have," he agreed. "But it didn't, because you didn't back down." She studied him then, really looked. The calm, the awareness, the scars he didn't talk about but carried anyway. "You military?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Something like that." They ate in companionable silence for a moment, the noise of the room flowing around them. Finally he spoke again. "You know," he said, "most people don't step in because they're afraid of becoming the story." She considered that. "And most bullies count on that." He met her gaze. Exactly. The conversation didn't last long. It didn't need to. Some connections weren't meant to linger. They existed to reinforce something important, then fade. As she stood to leave, she felt steadier than she had in weeks. The system hadn't magically fixed itself. People hadn't suddenly become kinder, but a line had been drawn publicly and clearly. For the first time since arriving, she believed something fundamental, that her presence here didn't require permission, and that belief changed everything. By the third day, the story had stopped being about what happened and started being about what it meant. That shift mattered more than anyone realized at first. In the halls, conversations lowered when she passed, not out of fear, but awareness. People were recalibrating. They were asking themselves quiet questions they'd avoided before. What would I have done? Why didn't I do anything? Would I step in next time, or would I keep my head down like always? Those questions had weight, and weight changes behavior. She felt it most in the small moments. A chair pulled out for her without ceremony. A classmate asking her opinion and actually listening to the answer. These weren't grand gestures, they were adjustments, subtle, human ones, the kind that happen when a system gets nudged off autopilot. But not everyone adjusted in healthy ways. By the end of the week, she started noticing the looks, the ones that weren't supportive or neutral, but resentful. The kind that said, "You disrupted something comfortable, not for you, but for us." Those looks came mostly from people who had benefited from silence, people who'd laughed before, people who'd filmed instead of intervened. She understood them better than they understood themselves. Change always exposed those who thrived in the old order. One afternoon, she sat alone in the gym, stretching after a workout. Physical exertion was still her anchor. Muscles didn't lie. They responded to effort honestly, without politics or rumor. Sweat grounded her in ways conversation never could. As she reached for her water bottle, her phone buzzed. A notification. Then another. Screenshots forwarded from someone she barely knew. A group chat. Not subtle, not private enough. She played the victim. Dude was just joking. Now we gotta watch everything we say. Her thumb hovered over the screen. The familiar pull rose up. The urge to defend, to explain, to justify. She resisted it. Not because she was weak, but because she was learning something deeper. Not every accusation deserved a response. Not every narrative could be corrected. And not every silence was surrender. Across town, the man sat in his truck, parked outside a hardware store, engine off. He hadn't meant to run into this again. Hadn't planned to stay in the area long. But he delayed his departure more than once this week, something that irritated him enough to force reflection. He'd spent years in environments where bullying took different shapes. Rank, power, unspoken rules enforced through humiliation rather than fists. He'd seen what happened when good people stayed quiet. He'd lived with the outcomes of moments when someone should have stepped in and didn't. That was why the cafeteria scene hadn't felt optional to him. But what lingered now wasn't the confrontation. It was the aftershock. The way systems resisted correction. The way individuals bore the cost of collective cowardice. He wondered how she was holding up. The answer came sooner than expected. The following morning, he watched from a distance as she walked into the building. Her posture was the same, upright, composed, but something about her eyes had hardened, not in a bitter way, in a focused one. She wasn't just surviving this anymore. She was processing it. And processing led to decisions. By lunchtime, a rumor reached her that the bully's suspension had been extended pending review, that his coach had benched him indefinitely, that college scouts were suddenly reconsidering character concerns. The rumor wasn't entirely accurate, but it didn't need to be. What mattered was that consequences were no longer theoretical. That afternoon, she was called into another meeting, this time not about the incident itself, but about what came next. Restorative practices, policy reviews, assemblies about conduct and bystander responsibility, the institution trying to retrofit ethics after the fact. As she listened, she realized something unsettling. They were grateful, but they were also afraid. Afraid of lawsuits, afraid of headlines, afraid of admitting how long this behavior had gone unchecked. When they asked her to speak at a student forum, she hesitated. Public visibility came at a cost. She asked for time. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the question looping. Speak and risk being defined by this forever. Stay quiet and let the moment pass. She thought of the cafeteria, the pillar, the crowd. She thought of how close she'd come to walking away. By morning, she had her answer. Chapter 8. The forum filled faster than expected. Students packed the auditorium, spilling into aisles, leaning against walls. Faculty lined the back, arms crossed, expressions cautious. This wasn't scheduled as an event. It had become one. The difference mattered. She stood backstage, fingers flexing unconsciously, grounding herself. She wasn't afraid of speaking. She was afraid of being misunderstood, of having her experience reduced to a soundbite, of becoming symbolic when she was still very human. The man sat near the exit, where he could see the room without being seen himself. Old habits again. He hadn't been invited. He hadn't asked permission. He just showed up. Not to intervene this time, but to witness. When her name was called, the applause surprised her. It wasn't thunderous. It wasn't performative. It was hesitant, building,